The second, no, the second Saturday of November, at about in between 3 and 3:30, I was going for a late hunt and was going to sit there until till dark in my deer blind that was set up out in the woods on some land that we hunted on, and I headed out to go hunting after I loaded up my gun and get to the deer blind, and I always took I always walked through the woods instead of taking a deer trail that you could follow, and it led to where you could just step off of that and go right into the deer blind in the back. But I didn't like taking that because if deer traveled that, I didn't want them to smell me, so I would always walk right through the woods straight ahead and go to a fence line and then turn left and follow that to the deer blind. And as soon as I hit the woods, I smelt a smell that I can only describe it as a wet dog that had never known a bath, mixed with a dead animal, mixed with a porta can that has never been cleaned, and it's filled with piss and crap all the way to the top of the rim of the commode. And it was foul. And because I figured it might be a dead animal and it would screw up my hunt that day, I was looking for it as I was walking through the woods. And I would stop and be, Jesus, what is that smell? Looking around, and I could never find it. I just kept going, and I got to the fence line, and then took the left and started following the fence line. And I was probably, I want to say, 50 or 60 yards from where you step into the woods to get in, because the deer blind was, between the fence and the woods, there was like a 5 or 6 foot spread of just a clear patch. And just you would have to step maybe 3 steps into the woods and to get to the deer blind. And I was probably 50 or 60 yards from it, and it looked like somebody was bent over and looking through the window, had their head in my deer blind of the window of the deer blind. And in my head, I thought, oh, my dad's here. I didn't see his car. And I walked about 10 more yards, and I said, no, that's a big guy. That's got to be another hunter. So I popped my gun off a safe, and I took maybe 10 more yards, 15 more yards, and got closer and said, no, that's somebody in a ghillie suit. In my head, I'm saying this. And I get a little bit closer, and I said, no, that's some dummy in a Bigfoot suit, and that's a good way to get shot by somebody like me. And about that time, I was probably between 25 to 35 yards from it. And it either heard me or smelt me. And he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up. And that shocked me and froze me right where I stood. And I was trying in my head to figure out whether it was a guy in a Bigfoot suit or a real Bigfoot. And 2 years before Andre the Giant died, I ran into him in Abilene, Texas, coming out of the kettle. So I've met Andre the Giant before, and he was 7'6". He was a big guy, and whatever this was made him look like a little guy. So they don't make people that big, and I could see the muscles underneath its fur flexing and working. I could see, any time it breathed, I could see underneath its fur moving. So I knew deadgum well it wasn't somebody in a suit. That was something real. That was a real creature. And we probably stared at each other for what seemed like forever to me, but it was probably about 10, 15 seconds, and I didn't move. I was frozen. So it stomped the ground and did a grunt growl like, "Urgh." And when it did that, I bet you I jumped about a foot in the air. but I stayed frozen in fright and fear. And when it did that, from the distance it was away, the only way I can describe this is like a lion. When it roars, you can feel it reverberate in your body, in your chest, and that's what it did. And it kept me frozen in fright, and I didn't move. So it just turned around and walked away from me and literally stepped over a barbed wire fence, just pushed it down a little bit with its hand and looked back over its shoulder at me, kind of like the Patty did in the Patterson-Gimlin footage. And then it walked across a field, and halfway across the field it looked back again at me, and when it got to the other side there was another barbed wire fence, but there was trees going across that one, and it stepped over that barbed wire fence between a couple of trees that was maybe 5 or 6 inches in diameter, and when it reached up to use that as a brace, kind of like a human would, but instead of grabbing it like a human would with its thumb upwards, it didn't wrap its thumb around the tree like a monkey. It reached up and had the thumb pointing down, and with all of its fingers, thumb and all, it grabbed the tree, looked back at me, and stepped into the woods, and it was like it disappeared, like it was magic. It just vanished, and I didn't smell it no more, nothing. We stood and looked at each other without any woods or anything in between us for at least 15 seconds. I can tell you exactly what he looks like. Their face, I want to say the Harry and the Hendersons Bigfoot is close, but it's not exact. Their face isn't as monkey looking as Harry's face. They look more Neanderthal. It had a beard like a man. It had a mustache, but what it didn't have was a round head. It had a cone-shaped head like a gorilla's, and its shoulder muscles that connect to the bottom of our neck doesn't connect to the bottom of their neck. It connects to the back of their skulls like a gorilla, so it makes it look like it don't have a neck. And this thing was jacked like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, you could see the muscles underneath and the sheer body mass of this thing. I mean, I'm a 5'8", 5'9" guy, and I weigh about 155 to 165 pounds. And I mean, this thing's legs were as big as my torso or bigger. I mean, this thing was huge. It was, I work commercial construction too, so it was at least between 9 and 12 feet tall, somewhere in there. I mean, it was a big guy. And yes, it was a guy. I could see its genitals through the fur. When it walked away, I could see its muscles moving. I could literally see when it stepped and walked. I could see the mid-tarsal break in its foot, halfway up its foot. It like your toes bend when you step. Its foot in the middle of its foot bends. You could tell that it was startled at first when it looked at me, but it tried to present itself as it wasn't afraid, and it scowled at me a little bit, and I didn't move. So it stomped the ground and grunt and growled at me, and when it did, I mean, it had an evil look on its face when it did. I almost bolted, but I figured, like an animal, it might make it chase you, so I didn't. I just stayed frozen. Its color was a reddish brown, like an orangutan on its back, and on its shoulders it was a little bit darker, like a blackish color.